Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where we are. And a very, very warm welcome to today's webinar from the London School of Emerging Technology. Hi, and thank you so much for joining us to make time. So today's topic really does matter right now because entrepreneurship is going to be changing real fast. So the tools that the founders are going to use, the way that teams are getting built, and the way that decisions get made is even as far as what actually it means to run a company, all of that is changing. So today's topic is just that, the operating system of today's entrepreneur. We're going to decide better, delegate smarter, and lead faster. Now, I like this topic because of the word operating system. I usually conjure up this idea of computers and technology, but every entrepreneur has one too. It's how an entrepreneur is going to think, is how they respond to the pressures, how they prioritize, how they make decisions, and how they delegate work. And ultimately, how it is that they lead a company. The problem is that a lot of founders are running completely new kind of businesses on pretty old operating systems. So that's what today's topic is. We're going to go and explore whether that old system still holds up today. And more importantly, if not, how to upgrade it. So to take us through all of this, I'm delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Amy. Amy, who is brilliant to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Marco, and hello, everyone. I'm obviously very pleased to be here today, and I think it's because this topic speaks to a challenge almost every entrepreneur experiences. So whether they're just starting out or they're already running a scaling company, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we often focus on the external things. So what products are we building? How do we acquire customers? How do we raise funding, grow revenue, use AI? But we don't often spend enough time asking ourselves, how should we as a founder operate ourselves? And the truth is that you can have a really, really excellent product, but still you can become the biggest bottleneck in your own company. You can have all the great people and still make every single decision yourself. You can buy sophisticated AI tools and still work the exact same way that you worked 5 years ago. So that's why today's sessions, it's not just about productivity. It's not about how to do more. It's about how you create a way of working that allows you as the founder, the team, and the general business to move faster without becoming really chaotic. So throughout today's session, I want you to keep asking yourself, does my business depend on me because it should, or because I've designed it that way? And that distinction is going to be really important moving forward.
Right, yeah, if I had a pound for every time I've been called a bottleneck, that's a pretty big one to start with. And that's going to tie us quite nicely into the next slide, which starts up with a direct statement then about how much entrepreneurship itself has changed. Mm-hmm. So we'll begin then with the opening, but it's an important one. So the habits that you make sense a decade ago don't automatically fit in today's environment.
Yeah, so this statement is deliberately simple. So you don't need to work like the entrepreneurs of 2015 to build a company in today's year, 2026. So I want to be clear about what that means. And it doesn't mean that everything old and kind of old-fashioned is irrelevant. Those fundamentals are still really important. Those customers and cash flow and execution, they all still matter. Same with the leadership. But the environment around those fundamentals have actually changed quite dramatically, as you can imagine. So if we think back to a typical entrepreneur 10 years ago, if they needed to do any research, they often spend hours and hours gathering that information. And if they wanted to have more capacity, they would hire more people. And again, if they wanted to enter a completely different market, a different country, they needed to expand that infrastructure. So a lot of those activities can be accelerated by technology, AI, automations, contractors, the kind of digital infrastructure that we have and the global platforms. So that opportunity's obviously completely changed, but there is also a downside, and the number of things that a founder can do has increased dramatically, and that can create this dangerous illusion. Just because something is possible doesn't mean you should necessarily go and do everything. It's a shiny object syndrome for sure.
Shiny object syndrome. Yeah, so just because you can doesn't mean you should. The challenge then really goes beyond just that of adopting the new technology, the new shiny toy. It's also about adapting your whole way of working with this new level of shininess.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is where a lot of founders get stuck. They adopt all these new tools, but then they keep all the habits that they had previously. So you might use AI, but still go through the approval manually. You might hire loads of people, but then still hold on to all those small decisions. And those reports might be automated, but they still sit in every single meeting. So the technology's changed, but the operation behind it all hasn't changed at all. And that obviously creates quite a lot of stress. And it's why entrepreneurs need to really consciously redesign how they work. So if you are listening to this webinar today, I want you to think about this. So which part of your business still operates exactly the same way that it did 3 or 5 years ago, even though the tools might have changed around it? And this is usually where the first opportunity for an upgrade exists.
Who doesn't love that? And you're right. So we're going to take that step further by comparing the entrepreneur then with the entrepreneur now. And maybe, Amy, if you wanted to walk us through what has actually gone and changed.
Yeah, 100%. So let's start at the beginning. Back then, whenever that might have been, people build larger teams to increase their capacity. So traditionally, if you wanted the business to do more, you tended to need more people. And today that is a little bit more flexible. So a really small core team can be supported by AI tools and automated systems, even freelancers or specialist partners, and that creates those kind of digital workflows. So the capacity that you can take on is no longer actually determined purely on the headcount. And that obviously is a major change. The second shift that we've got is kind of the information, where information was kind of scarce. Entrepreneurs often had an advantage because they knew something that other people didn't. And today, information is just unlimited. You can literally learn anything on the internet nowadays. So you can access all kinds of market reports, competitor information, customer feedback, AI generated analysis, and that global data almost instantly. But then it kind of creates a different problem. The challenge is no longer, how do I find this information? It's more so, what information actually deserves my attention? And that's a huge shift in the responsibility of a founder. Moving on to the third shift, decision speed. So previously, many kind of strategic decisions could take weeks, months, whatever that looks like. But today, the markets can move in a matter of days. So consumer, customer, whatever you want to call it, expectations, they can quickly change, and competitors can launch very quickly. Same with technology, that can shift very quickly. And because of that, the slow decision making becomes way more expensive. So speed obviously doesn't mean just go out and be reckless. It just means that you can build systems with making informed decisions without unnecessarily delaying that action. And then moving on to delegation. So earlier, delegation kind of meant finding another person that you can delegate to. But now, again, we can obviously delegate to a person, but we can also delegate to AI, automation, agents are now a thing, or have a combination of all three. And that's definitely what I would suggest. Please do not rely solely on AI or solely on one person. But this obviously changes the role of a founder. So you're no longer just looking to assign work, you're kind of designing how that work's going to happen behind the scenes. And then we've got geographic reach. Obviously, previously, entering another market often required that physical infrastructure, but now digital businesses can potentially operate internationally from a really, really early stage of business, which creates an enormous opportunity for startup businesses. But it also adds that complexity. So the more markets, more customer types, the more decisions, regulations, communication, all of that increases the opportunity, but then it also increases the management complexity as well. And then finally, we've got the founder advantage. So this is probably the most interesting one. On the side, it says the founder advantage used to be knowledge, and now it's about judgment and speed. So that shift is incredibly important, because if everyone can access that similar information, what actually creates that advantage. So it's your ability to interpret it, your ability to decide what's right and what's wrong, to prioritize, and the ability to actually action on that information. And that is a new competitive advantage that we've not had before.
Yeah, that's right. What is your USP? And I think just to point out at the bottom there, the statistic that shows up, it says 82% of leaders feel like this the moment to properly rethink strategy and operations is now.
Yeah, and that's the part that I'd like to emphasize. It's not necessarily the number itself, it's the idea behind it. So we're moving beyond the stage of just adding AI tools. The bigger question is how should this itself be redesigned? So if an AI system can perform part of the workflow, then perhaps that workflow should completely change. So if decisions can happen closer to the team, perhaps the approval process should change. And if the automation can remove that repetitive work, perhaps a role should focus more on judgment and problem solving. And that's why the sentence at the bottom of the slide is so powerful, where it says, yesterday's entrepreneur managed the resources, but today's entrepreneur must orchestrate the intelligence behind it. So I want you to think about your own company. Are you spending more time managing those tasks or orchestrating people, tools, decisions, and systems? And that difference tells you how modern your operating model actually is.
That's right. Yeah, it always related back to what you have at home. And I think just to lead us into the next bit, which is introducing us what I think is one of the most interesting ideas in the whole thing, that capacity is not the same as capability. Now, what would you go and think that means for founders?
So it really means that your organization can become capable of producing more without becoming capable of handling more. So let's look at those 4 examples on the slide. So the more AI, the more output. So AI can help teams generate way more ideas, research, analysis, drafts, content, just generally way more options than you initially had. But every additional output creates another question. Which one's good? Which one matters? Which one should we actually act on? So AI creates that output, but the judgment there is still required. Moving on to the next one, more channels equals more opportunities. So you can obviously now reach several different customers through LinkedIn, email, communities, partnerships, campaigns. I mean, the list is endless. And these obviously all create opportunity, but it also creates that fragmentation. So if the founder tries to be absolutely everywhere, the business can become way more busy than actually effective. So the real challenge then becomes, what are you actually going to prioritize and what matters the most for your particular business? Then moving on to the kind of more data, that equals more information. So a lot of companies right now don't suffer from a lack of data, they suffer from a lack of interpretation, like what's on your dashboard, what CRM reports do you need to look at, analytics, feedback, all of that kind of stuff. So it is obviously possible to spend all day looking at that information and still not actually make a decision. And that's why the attention on specific things becomes so valuable. And then finally, the more tools, more decisions, obviously. Every tool creates those possibilities, but every tool can also create a lot of complexity. Should we actually use it? Should we integrate it? Who owns it? Is it secure? There's so many different decisions to make all the time. And suddenly that tool that was supposed to save a lot of time creates way more decisions and a lot more stress. And that's where overload can begin.
That's right. Yeah, sometimes less is more. And just to underline the thing at the bottom there, which is that the gap between the pressure to be more productive and the people feeling that they don't just have the time and the money or the energy, frankly, for it.
Yeah, exactly. And that interruption point is particularly an important one too. So obviously the meetings, messages, emails, notifications, all that kind of stuff. Every interruption looks really small, but when you group them together, it just completely destroys your thinking and your focus. So a lot of founders need that focused thinking work more than anyone else in the business, because a lot of your job is thinking and it all kind of lives inside your brain. And that's because your highest value work usually involves the strategy, the judgment, looking after people, relationships, and what direction you need to go in. And it's not always just that constant like reactivity to the new things that come up. So I want you to think about your business. What is actually limiting your startup today? Is it the money? Is it the people, the time, or is it just genuinely your attention and your focus on things? A lot of founders immediately say that they need more people. That's what you think about when you go and scale. It's like, let's add more people to the business. But sometimes it's not actually about how many people you need to add to the business. It's just they need fewer decisions reaching them. They need to be able to delegate. And sometimes it's not about adding more tools. It's about creating simplicity with those tools. And again, with the information, it's just about having that clarity. So the slide ends with a sentence that should really guide the rest of this webinar. So a scarce resource of the modern startup isn't information. It's where that focus is aligned with that. And if a founder attention is scarce, then it must be allocated intentionally. And that's where the founder operating system starts to become really practical.
All right. I like it. Yeah, the founder operating system. So I think we've established that entrepreneurship really has gone and changed. And founders today are dealing with a totally different level of information, levels of opportunity, and of course, the decision pressures with that. So we'll take that with us and we'll move from the problem to that, then the actual operating model. Because so far, what we've done is we've covered how the entrepreneurship does change, what's changed, and why the founder attention has become such a critical resource into this. So this is more at the heart of today's topic, really, because I think it lays out what the modern founder operating system actually looks like. So perhaps, Amy, do you want to go and walk us through it?
Yeah, 100%. So this slide's really about turning everything that we've discussed so far into that practical operating model. So at the top, you can see the inputs coming into the business every day. So we've got customers, data, team, market, AI, competition. And those 6 things are constantly creating the information that you get, opportunities, risks, questions, and then those decisions. So the problem that many founders will allow those inputs to reach them directly, and a customer issue tends to reach the founder. The competitor launches something new and the founder reacts, and then the team asks a question and then the founder answers. And eventually, the founder becomes a central processing unit for the entire company. And whilst that sounds important, it's actually really dangerous because no human being can sustainably process absolutely everything. So the founder operating system on this slide introduces the 4 core processes. So 1 being decide what actually deserves your attention. This tends to be the first filter. So not everything deserves your attention, which obviously sounds obvious, but in practice, a lot of entrepreneurs treat urgency and importance as if they are the same thing, and they're not. So an email marked urgent doesn't necessarily mean that it deserves your attention straight away. So the first discipline of the modern entrepreneur is to not make those decisions faster. It's deciding which decisions deserve me at all. And that's obviously a completely different skill. Moving on to delegation. So who or what should execute certain things? So it doesn't say who should execute, it says who or what should execute. Because today, execution can sit with team member, specialist, AI, an automated workflow, or obviously a combination of all of those. So the founder's no longer just distributing tasks between people, it's designing what the best execution model actually is. Moving on to design, so how should the work actually happen? So it's not asking who will do this, we have to ask, should this happen at all? Imagine the process has, 7 steps, and actually 4 of those steps aren't actually necessary at all. And maybe 2 approvals exist because historically someone's requested those. And maybe a weekly report is produced that no one actually reads. Maybe the team spends hours copying information between tools, and that's not necessarily, a people problem. It's a design in the operating system problem. So before you actually delegate that, automate that work, we need to redesign it, because automating an inefficient process simply creates inefficiency. And then finally, we're moving on to direct. So where is the company actually going? So this is where the founder involvement becomes the most valuable. We've got vision, strategic priorities, market choices, long-term direction, because a company can become extremely efficient at executing the wrong strategy. So that direction must remain really, really clear. And when these four elements work really well together, we've got design, delegate, design, and direct, and the outputs of speed, focus, quality, and growth. And when they don't work together, the founder obviously becomes overloaded. And that's why the final line on this slide is so relevant. So when every decision reaches the founder becomes the company's slowest API. And it sounds funny but think about what an API does. It connects the system. If every request has to pass through one point, that obviously becomes very overloaded and everything slows down. And that's exactly what happens in the founder-dependent company.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that. Yeah, like the founder API. So really, this comes down to protecting the founder's time for the work where their judgment actually becomes the most valuable thing, not just removing them entirely from the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the goal isn't that the founder just becomes absent. It's just that the founder has a lot more intentional work.
Yeah. Oh, so founder intentionality is going to lead us into this very slide. If not every decision deserves the founder, then how do we decide which ones do?
Yeah, and that's where that kind of decision filter becomes really useful. So imagine yourself, you've got 20 decisions that you need to make, and the instinct tends to become, I'll evaluate all 20 of those questions. And instead, you need to ask yourselves these two questions as a filter. How significant are the consequences if I don't look at these 20 decisions? And then question two is, how difficult is this decision to reverse? So those two questions immediately change how we allocate our attention. So we'll look at each category. So the low consequence plus easy to reverse, just delegate those out. They're the decisions that where the cost is getting slightly wrong is low. The slide gives us an example like a meeting schedule, routine reporting. And now imagine every founder personally checking every single meeting every time, every calendar invite, every minor report format. And that creates control and micromanagement, but it doesn't actually create value. And these are the perfect areas to establish a standard and then delegate that ownership out. And then we look at high consequence and also easy to reverse. So we're going to test those. This is a really useful category. And this slide uses the examples of a new advertising campaign, a landing page, and these decisions may matter, but they are reversible. So instead of debating for 3 weeks over these, test, run a small experiment, collect that evidence, learn from that evidence. And then the founders often waste enormous time trying to intellectually solve all those questions that the market can answer through experimentation. Then we've got low consequence and hard to reverse. And this is something that we need to review. So the slide gives us an example of a new software contract. And maybe that decision isn't strategically transformative, but once you sign an annual contract or migrate all your systems, reversing that actually might become really expensive and disruptive. So this deserves more attention, more of a review. It's not necessarily something to obsess over, but enough diligence to avoid that unnecessary cost. And then finally, we've got the high consequence and then hard to reserve. And this is where you probably need to step in as a founder. This is where your judgment becomes the premium. So the examples on this slide includes obviously choosing a co-founder, funding decisions, a really big hire, entering a new strategic market. And those decisions shape the company for years. So if you only have a limited amount of time thinking, this is where you need to spend it. So the sentence at the bottom of this slide captures the whole idea. You need to spend your best thinking time on the decisions that are expensive and very expensive to reverse. And that's such a practical rule that you can implement, because founders often make the opposite mistake. They spend 30 minutes approving a social media caption, and then 5 minutes rushed into evaluating a senior high. And that's obviously backwards.
Everyone's a critic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the example. It really does show how much this comes down to where your best judgment actually gets spent as a founder, more than how many decisions end up landing on your desk and working through them.
Yeah, definitely. Your best judgment should go on the higher stake decisions for sure. So just, I guess, for the audience, if you think about one decision that's sitting on your desk right now, I want you to ask yourself, is this a really high consequence decision, and is it hard to reverse? And if the answer is no for both of those, probably doesn't really need your attention at all.
Good rubric. Okay, well, one to keep in mind. I'm going to shift over to put this into practice with real people. Well, I say real people. I hope this person will be of use or value through the lens of Alex. And Alex is a founder of a growing SaaS startup, and it's Monday morning. Lucky him. So, Amy, what kind of Monday is Alex actually going and having?
Cool. So it's probably the kind of morning that founders recognize immediately. You open up your laptop and this is going to be waiting for him. You've got 12 emails requiring approval. You've got 8 customer issues, 6 marketing decisions, 5 hiring questions, 4 product decisions, 3 partnership requests, 5 internal approvals, and then 4 strategic decisions. That's 47 decisions and 1 founder on one day. And now the company thinks that that's a productivity problem, and maybe everyone just needs to work harder and then it'll all just get solved. And, maybe Alex needs a better calendar. Maybe he needs to do some time blocking, some different time management apps. But here, the slide gives us 3 different choices. A, the team is not working hard enough. B, that Alex needs better time management. And C, decision authority hasn't been distributed. The answer is C. I'm hoping everyone else landed on that too. The problem isn't just productivity. The problem is that decision architecture that you've created.
Okay, big title. So can you explain what it means by the decision architecture?
Yeah, so it just simply means who is allowed to decide what, giving people the authority. So when every question escalates upwards, the organization becomes really dependent on that founder. And that dependency often happens accidentally. And maybe the founders just made every single decision when there were just him or 3 employees. And then there were 6 employees, and there were 12, and there were 20. But then every decision, the decision system basically never changed. So when the business grows, and while that decision ownership remains frozen, that's when the founder becomes really overwhelmed. So if we look more closely at Alex's 47 decisions, do all of those 12 email approvals need him? Probably not. Do all of those 8 customer issues require the founder? Probably not. Do those 6 marketing decisions need that founder level involvement? Probably not. But those 4 strategic decisions, those may genuinely require him to look at. And the goal isn't to eliminate those decision makings. It's just to move those decisions to the right level in the business. Mm-hmm. So if we do something called the 7-day founder test, and that's why the final question on this slide is so powerful. If the founder actually leaves, goes on holiday, puts his feet up for 7 days, which decisions actually stop happening? And those are the bottlenecks. If you think about that, if the founder does go away for a week, can the team answer those routine customer questions on their own? Can the marketing team approve the normal content that goes out on a daily basis? Can invoices be processed? Can projects actually progress without Alex looking over it all the time? And can that small budget decisions happen without him? And if everything freezes, you have a serious problem. And it's not just solely on the team. It's about that system dependency.
Right. Yeah. Still keeping with the operating system terms. Yeah. I think founders do read that system dependencies, often as a proof that they're indispensable, perhaps.
Yeah. And that's a really dangerous psychological trap. And I think founders often feel if everyone needs me, I must be valuable in the business. But the dependence is not the same as value. If a founder creates more value when the business can operate routinely without them, they can then focus on where their unique skills and judgment is actually needed.
Oh, well said. And actually, that leads us into the delegation side of things, because traditionally, delegation has always been fairly straightforward, just point and look, founder to manager, manager to employee. But this slide says delegation itself has also changed.
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest operational changes that entrepreneurs need to understand. The old model was mostly linear. You've got the founder, the manager, then the employees, and more work meant that more people somewhere needed to be in that chain. But the modern model kind of looks a lot differently, as we've spoken about AI and automation and all that kind of workflow that can be done by an agent. Or obviously a combination of all of those. And that changes the founder's role completely. So you're not asking which employee can do this thing. It's asking what capability does this task actually require, and then where you go and delegate that. So this slide also highlights that 46% of leaders reported that their organizations were already using agents to fully automate their workflows or business processes, while teams are increasingly expected to train and manage those agents. But I don't want everyone to focus necessarily on that number. We need to focus on the management implication. So if a part of your workforce increasingly includes intelligence systems, then obviously that leadership changes too. So you've got to understand where the AI is useful and where automation is useful, but also where that human expertise is essential. So where that accountability sits is where the judgment must remain human.
Right. So perhaps one of the bigger mistakes you could do is ask, well, how can I replace people with AI?
Yeah, it's obviously far too simplistic. The much better question is written actually on this slide. So what is the best combination of human judgment, AI capability, and automation for this task?
Yeah.
So let's take a simple example. Imagine you're preparing a market entry recommendation. The AI might support your initial research, competitor summaries, trend analysis. Automated workflow might collect recurring data. A specialist could provide that legal or market-specific expertise. And then the founder might make the final strategic decision. And that's not AI replacing anyone. That's just the capability being orchestrated intentionally. And this really matters because the different types of work require different strengths. AI obviously can be fast. The automations can be consistent, and the humans understand the nuances, trust, ethics, context, and then the general relationships as well. And the smartest operating model doesn't force one type of capability onto every single task. It matches the task to the capability of the automation, whatever.
Well, so thank you, Amy. I think we've gone from understanding the founder overload to something much, much more practical, because we've gone and seen what works out, what decisions actually do deserve the founder, to then spot the decision bottlenecks, how delegation now stretches well beyond simply just handing the work off to someone else. And to pick up that point, as we've just done at the beginning, about building up the right combination of people, of AI, of automation, and external expertise. But I wanted to bring that back to the founder personally. That's the one that we're interested in. So how can someone actually identify, whether they're spending their own time in the right place?
Yeah, so this is where that 70% founder test that we're going to talk about becomes really useful. And I want everyone to think about what you did last week. What was in your job description that you did? But what you actually spent a lot of time doing as well. So now place those activities into 4 different buckets. The first bucket is only the things that I can do. These are the things where your role as a founder genuinely really matters. It's the strategy, the vision, the really critical relationships and the culture of your workplace. And they deserve your attention because your perspective and leadership create that unique value. Bucket 2 is what can anyone else take on? What can someone else do? And this includes general things like operations, routine approvals. And if you're still personally managing every single routine approval or coordinating the day-to-day activities, you need to ask whether that responsibility actually belongs with you or whether it can belong with someone else. Bucket 3 is what AI can assist with: research, analysis, drafting, planning. And that doesn't mean that AI owns that final decision. It means that AI can potentially reduce the amount of time that you spend getting to that final decision. And then finally, bucket 4, and this is just things that just should not exist. And this may be the most valuable category. It's the unnecessary meetings, the duplicate reporting, approval loops that don't really matter, that low value administration. So before automating all of that, you need to actually ask yourself, should this exist at all? And now comes the uncomfortable question from this slide. If 70% of your week requires you personally, have you built a company or have you just created a job for yourself? And obviously you don't need to answer that publicly, but I would really just take a lot of time to think about that and answer it to yourself privately, because as your business grows, your role and how you operate should evolve too.
Wow. Okay. So have you built a company or created a job for yourself? It does sound like the real job is about less working fewer hours and much more about making sure that the hours you do spend are actually going where they create value.
Yeah. So we need to not look at like how busy was I? It's where did my involvement genuinely make the most difference?
All right. So let's put that into practice. Why don't we apply that 70% rule into the final case study here, where we have Nova AI. We have a 5-person company preparing to enter a new market. And I guess, what choices does this company have?
So under the traditional approach that we spoke about at the beginning of this webinar, Nova AI might immediately think that it needs to hire. It needs to hire a market researcher, a copywriter, sales analysis, operations coordinator, and customer support. But that could mean months of hiring. And obviously that comes at a significant cost. But the modern operating system approach shown on this slide asks a slightly different question. What capabilities do we actually need, and where should those capabilities come from? So the core team keeps responsibility for that strategy, the customer relationships, and then obviously those final decisions. But AI and automation can support that research, the market analysis, the content drafts, lead qualification, reporting, and external specialists can provide that expertise in legal, tax, and specialist market knowledge. So here's a question I'd like to ask the audience. Do you think that Nova AI is understaffed, or is it differently staffed? And that's an important distinction. A small team doesn't automatically mean limited capabilities anymore. And that slide puts it as small no longer means low capabilities. Sorry, completely read that wrong. But it only works when founders deliberately decide what should stay inside the company, and then what can be supported by that technology, and then where does the external expertise and where does that become necessary?
Right. So the modern entrepreneurship is less about collecting headcount and much more about intelligently assembling the capability.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean build the biggest team ever. It's just about building that right capability.
Okay, so why don't we covered a lot of ground today, and I suppose that this slide is going to turn it into something that founders can make the most out of. What we can start doing tomorrow.
Cool. So yeah, let's move on to the practical takeaway so you can actually implement it into your business rather than just being theory. So instead of trying to transform your entire company overnight, give yourself 7-day runway. So day 1, track every decision that you make on that day. All you need to do is observe what decisions are actually reaching you. Don't need to change anything yet. Day 2 is about identifying those founder-only decisions. So if you look at the list that you gathered on day 1, which of those genuinely required you to look over? Day 3, you need to find those 3 repeatable tasks to automate. Look for predictability and those kind of rule-based work. Day 4, we move into identifying the 3 tasks that AI can actually take on and accelerate. So whether it is researching or drafting or planning, or they can all be the starting points. Day 5 is delegate an outcome. So don't simply just say, do this task. You need to give someone the desired results, success criteria, and then just give them the ownership and step back. Day 6 is removing that one unnecessary process that just does not need to happen. A meeting for no reason, a report again for no reason, or an approval. And that's something that consumes a lot of time without actually creating that much value. And day 7 is reinvest that time that you've now gained. And that's really important. Don't simply just fill that recovered time with more admin that's not actually valuable. You need to put it into your customers, into the strategy, into the people in your business, and obviously the future of your business. So I want to leave you with the challenge that's written on this slide. Don't ask yourself, how can I fit more into my week? Ask yourself, what should no longer require me? And that single question captures the operating system that we've been discussing today.
Wow. Okay. Well, Amy, thank you very much. I think we're at the Q&A section now, where we've gone and covered how entrepreneurship has changed, how founders can protect their attention, how delegation is evolving, and I think how AI and automation can support the business rather than just complicate it. So I wanted to go ahead and take 3 questions I think we'll end up with on the founders joining us today with. And so I'll begin with question 1. I'm seeing here the question come up, which is aiming for a very, very early stage founder who is still doing almost everything personally. When is the right time for them to start delegating?
It's often earlier than most founders actually think. Delegation, again, like we've said, it doesn't actually mean hiring more people. It's kind of identifying that repeatable work. So like we said before, ask yourself, does this actually genuinely require my judgment? Should someone else own it? And then can AI assist with that? And if it can be automated. So even if you're a 1, 2, 3 person company, you can still start designing those decision operation systems and then that ownership early. The longer every activity depends on you, the founder, the harder that dependency becomes to remove that later.
Okay, well said. So another question comes up, which is how should founders decide themselves whether something belongs with AI or with automation or human?
If we use that test that we discussed earlier, so if it's repetitive, predictable, and rule-based, consider going for an automation. But then if it involves that research, the summarization, drafting, pattern recognition, then I would consider AI assistance. But then again, if it involves the trust, the ethics, negotiation, leadership, high-stake judgment, that obviously needs to be kept with human ownership. And the goal isn't to the maximum automation. It's the right capability for the right work.
The right capability for the right work. Right. And finally, which is a question that I hear a lot, what's the clearest sign that a founder has become the bottleneck for their own company?
Go back to that 7-day question that we used. So if you disappeared for 1 week, what would actually stop working? So if those routine approvals stop and the customers are waiting for answers, or the marketing decisions freeze, or the team can't progress anything without you, then those are the warning signs. And your company should need you for that direction and high value judgment, but not for every single routine decision. And that's the difference between becoming a really important founder and being that operational bottleneck.
Okay, well said. Well, thanks, Amy. Thank you. As we head towards the end of today's session, I think there's one more message worth leaving you with, which is that your AI journey, it starts now. And for anyone who wants to go and take their own startup journey further, then this is a good moment to mention and remind you that the LSET has an ecosystem out there and the option to go and explore the LSET Starter Incubator.
Fab. Yeah, I think that connects nicely with today's entire conversation. AI shouldn't be simply something that you just add because everyone else is just using it. It should become part of a much more thoughtful question. So how do you build a smarter and more scalable and capable business? So whether you're currently developing an idea, you're building your first team, or you're preparing to scale your business, the objective is to create a business that can develop beyond you as the founder, doing everything personally. And that's where the ecosystems, mentorship, expertise, and structured startup support that LSET provides can become really valuable. Just before we move on, I'd like to leave everyone with 3 simple ideas from today's session. First, decide better, protect that judgment that you have on decisions that genuinely really deserve it. Delegate smarter, so don't just delegate the tasks, delegate the outcomes, and then use the right combination of things like people, AI, automation. Lead faster. Build enough clarity that your company can move forward without waiting for you every single step. The modern entrepreneur isn't successful because they personally do everything. They're successful because they've built a system where the right work gets done by the right capability at the right time. But thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, Amy, thank you so much for such an insightful, wonderful, practical session. And again, thank you to everyone else out there who is joining us and watching today. Well, I hope just as much that today's webinar has been getting you to think a little bit differently about how your business operates, what it does, as much as how your business works through. Perhaps the best place to start tomorrow morning is with that one question, which is, what am I doing today that should no longer require me? Now, on behalf of the London School of Emerging Technology, thank you so much for being part of today's webinar. We'd love to welcome you back with one of today's and tomorrow, I believe, upcoming sessions.